Number 1. Bulgaria. The first creature this account deals with is a home spirit, a master each household has. Even ruins and abandoned buildings, orchards and crop fields fall under his protection too. It's Stupan, also Stupanin, and figures in Bulgarian folklore. You might recognize it as being the domovoi in Russian lore. The Stupan is said to be the specter of the oldest member of a clan, the beginner of the family bloodline. He resides under the home's threshold or around the fireplace, often as a large but harmless snake, and fends off the inhabitants from sickness, natural disasters, and dark magic. Stupan is sometimes an arrowhead, a woman, or a different animal. You might anger him if he doesn't agree with a big decision in the household, or if you disturb his lair, misplace something. The Stupanin will then appear to you in a dream, knock from the attic or the basement. To the story. It was during a holiday visit to relatives at Stambuliski, the towns in South Bulgaria, on the right bank of the Mariyanka river. My aunt, Mom, and I were carrying sacks of potatoes late at night from our orchard through the village streets to the house. The entire family had gone to dig them up during the day, then the men carried some home. The three of us were taking care of what was left over. I was around 5 or 7 at the time. The streets were quiet, dimly lit. Mom and Aunt were murmuring with an even tone, and I was dozing off in motion. We reached the house and dropped the sacks near the outer yard stairs to the basement in the dark. Mom and Aunt start talking with Grandma, who pops out from the lit-up threshold about where to leave the sacks, and I'm standing by the staircase in the dark, several feet away. I'm sleepy, and just stare at the basement door and the black abyss down below until a light appears out from under its frame. So I'm thinking, Grandpa's got the flashlight to unlock the basement for us, so we can move the potatoes there. The light gets close to the door frame. The door jiggles a bit, and I hear my name. So I answer by habit, "Yeah, Grandpa, I'll bring them down now." Mom and Aunt and Grandma don't notice me descending down the stairs at first, and murmur on. The thing is, the more stairs I walk down with the sacks, the more the door bangs but doesn't open, and the light under the frame moves around and grows. And I hear my name twice, in an angry tone, impatient and annoyed. It wasn't my grandpa's voice, but it was male, and there was no other man in the house that night. So I call loudly, "Grandpa, can you not unlock the door then?" and come very near to the bottom. My mom, aunt, and grandma realize I'm speaking to someone in the dark and call me back from the dimly lit threshold. "Your grandpa's here, honey," and he pops out behind grandma from the house corridor. I did look back at the door, and it was still jiggling, but it slowly ceased, and the light retreated away from the frame. I don't recall explaining anything to my family. They just ushered me inside, quietly and wearily. At no point did whatever called from the basement feel malicious to little me. The voice simply sounded like a weak elderly man, irritated he couldn't see me but hear me. Grumpy, not malevolent. Nevertheless, as the next tale will stress, under no circumstances should you answer to a call from the dark in Slavic lands. Unpure creatures call out to lure you in. As a teen, I got told we'd bought the old house from relatives, and previously on its place stood a small hut where the oldest of those relatives had, indeed, passed away. It appears to me as though an old resident of our property had become its Stupanin spirit and had called me down that night. The Stupanin can often be angry with a family member if they misplace or touch something around the home they shouldn't. And me, being a kiddo, there are millions of Stupan's things I could have tampered with by accident. Number 2. Montenegro. Background info. In the folk beliefs of several South Slavic nations, the Karakondrula, or Gundurak, is a malevolent goblin-like creature, heavy, squat, and ugly. It can resemble an abnormally hairy human, be tall, with a large head and horns on it, or could be one-eyed, standing on a single leg. Sometimes it's a horse-headed man. It is a shapeshifter, and may appear as a dog, a man, a sheep, or calf. It dwells by abandoned watermills, caves or rivers, and comes out only at night. Caraconjulas appear only during the 12 unbaptized days between Christmas and Epiphany. In central Serbia, Shumaria, these days are 40 instead. If a caraconjula finds you outdoors after dark during this time, it jumps on your back and demands to be carried wherever it instructs. This torture would end only when roosters announce the dawn. Come their song, a caraconjula would release its victim and run away or burst, had it not thrown the poor soul from a cliff or under the rocks of a watermill by then. To the story. I've heard a vague recollection of my grandmother, about a certain relative of hers traveling through the fields during night. All of a sudden, something jumped on his back, something rather heavy. He was startled and asked, "Kosi," meaning "who are you?" The answer was, "Ne pitaj kosi, no nosi." Ask not who it is, but keep carrying. And thus he went for the duration of the night, until roosters started to crow. Number 3. Ukraine. Background info. The following account comes from Marefa City, Kharkiv district, and was featured in a documentary linked in the description. It concerns the family of a Cossack by the last name of Polovets. His son was the famed 17th century Ukrainian military leader, Ivan Serko. Serko was rumored to have made a deal with the devil, to have been a charakternik, or sorcerer, and numerous other creatures, one of which an oborotin, a type of shapeshifter in Slavic mythology, hence the name, meaning to turn into. An oborotin may become any animal or plant, but often takes the form of a wolf. To the story. When the infant was born, witnesses cried out in fear, and his mother lost consciousness. The priest that had come to christen the child refused to take it in his arms. He made the sign of the cross from afar and fled. And the one who scared them all did not cry out. He lay on the table and played with a piece of pastry, and then, before the eyes of his baffled parents, ate it. The boy was born with teeth. According to folk beliefs, the appearance of teeth on an infant mean a future murderer was born. Fearful Christians advised the parents to rid themselves of the child, but the boy was rescued by his father. He brought the child out to the gathered crowd and proclaimed, "With these teeth he shall tear at the enemy." They called the child Ivan. From the very first days of his life, unusual things occurred with the infant. Items would fall and shatter after its gaze, milk would go bad, and neighbors would forbid their offspring to play with Ivan. Among themselves, they'd call him the son of the devil, who even the village mutts would whimper away from. But Ivan himself grew into a weak, sickly child. On St. John's Eve, the boy vanished. He came back only 3 days later, his garments torn apart, and his body covered in scars. Under his shirt, he was shielding a small gray bundle, a wolf cub. Rumors spread across the village, and the boy has met the devil himself. The unholy gifted him with horrific power. Ivan told no one where he'd been. Many years after, he confided in his son how from St. John's Eve he wandered the forest for several nights. What he looked for he knew not, but remembered a field and a full moon. On it stood a she-wolf. She threw herself upon him, and he bled but held her by the neck until all was quiet. He'd strangled her with his bare hands, and when he came to, he heard whimpering, In the grass next to him, a wolfling was hiding. Ivan took the cub. From that night onwards, he'd call himself Serko, brother of the wolf. Years after, people would say of him, he's a shapeshifter. During the day, he'd be the famed colonel Ivan Serko, who terrorized the Ottoman Turks. By night, a wolf. Before going into battle, Serko was rumored to scout the battlefield in the form of a wolf and learn all of the enemy's positions. Some still believed he'd struck a deal with the devil himself. Number 4. Serbia. It happened in April 2017. At that time, I lived just with my brother, who was usually at work during the day, so I was home alone. One night, my brother returned from work so exhausted that he went to bed immediately. As soon as he lay down, he fell asleep. That night, I remember it clearly, like it happened yesterday. I was working on a research about satanic sects in Serbia and their influence upon the youth. In order to better understand it, I had to thoroughly research everything regarding the sects. I found an article about demons and similar creatures and began to read. As the article was a longish one, I decided to completely immerse myself in my work. While I was reading the article, it was interrupted by a voice coming from the street under my balcony. I heard it call me, "Dmitrie, Dmitrie, Dmitrie." I knew that voice because it was my brother's voice, the brother I lived with. I saw that it was 2:30 in the morning, and I didn't know why he got up, because he went to sleep 2 hours ago saying that he was exhausted. Above all, he went out on the street and stood under my balcony. He could have come to my room and called me, but I thought to myself, well, let's see what he wants. Maybe he needs my help with the car or something else. He can't be calling in vain. He must need something. I approached the balcony door and reached for the door handle, and then, like something told me, stop, don't open the door. I stopped and took a step back. I suddenly realized what time it was and that I had been reading about demons and different creatures not of this world. Slowly, I turned around and stepped out of the room and went to my brother's room to check if he was there. And yes, he was in his room, sleeping. Shocked, and I must admit, scared out of my wits, I woke my brother up and asked him whether he'd called me. However sleepy and obviously annoyed that I woke him up, he told me that ever since he got back from work, he had been sleeping, and that he was too tired to lead any kind of conversation with me. After that, he told me to leave his room at once. Distraught, not because I irritated my brother, but because of the voice calling from the street, I went back to my room. Thought I'd just imagined the voice, and that I'd been so immersed in my research and the stories about the paranormal that my mind started messing with me, and I was hearing things. But, yes, of course, there is a but. As I convinced myself that I'd just imagined the voice and calmed myself down, at that moment, once again, coming from the same street under my balcony, I heard the voice that sent shivers down my spine. Dmitrie, Dmitrie, Dmitrie. This time, I was sure what I heard. I did not speak and look at the balcony door. It seemed to me that I wasn't even breathing, hoping that it, whatever it was, wouldn't hear me. After a few seconds, I could not hear it any longer. I could not hear it calling for me. Since then, nothing similar has happened to me. However, to this day, I've been trying to find an explanation to this event, and I've been convincing myself that even though I love looking into the paranormal, there's a logical explanation for what happened to me. What is more, I think that this research saved me in a way, because in Slavic mythology, as well as in most other mythologies, there are creatures and demons that imitate the voices of people you know, and in this way lure you into a trap. There are a lot of creatures that have these abilities. What is important is that you do not answer and just remain silent until they stop. What exactly was calling me, I really don't know, but thank Lord I didn't find out and I stopped myself on time. It's one thing to be told about one's experience, but it's completely something else to experience it yourself. Number 5. Serbia again. Background info. The following is a description of the folklore creature Omaia. Before the actual story, Omaia appear mostly by big calvaries and after wars. There was recorded information about Omaias way before the very first written documents about Serbs. Omaia, as the people of Shumaria, the central part of Serbia, think, were created when some soldier or civilian was killed without honor, so the soul of the killed man seeks revenge. People are not sure if it's just a human soul seeking revenge, or perhaps some evil entity. The main goal of Omaia is to bewitch its victims so it can take them to a river or even a cliff, so the victim can be drowned or fall from the cliff. Hence its name from the Serbian verb omadijati, to charm. Also, it is very common for Omaia to jump on its victim and to ride them so the victim can shudder until they collapse from fatigue. When dawn comes, those victims can be found clinging to a tree or wooden pole, and then they become conscious. But because of encounters like these, the victim's hair would become gray and they'd start having some mental issues later in their lives. To avoid such encounters, people wouldn't go out in the dead of night and during the so-called unbaptized days, because during this time, evil spirits and beings are the most active. Omaia lives next to rivers, lakes, forests, crossroads, bridges, battlefields, no matter how old the battlefield is, but only if no light reaches there at all. If a human encounters Omaia, he has to protect himself by lighting a cigarette, as Omaia hates light, fire, and embers, or by saying the prayer, Holy Trinity, Mother of God, and all the saints, please save me. Omaia is a shapeshifter. It's a being without a specific body or form, but it can shapeshift into the form of a child, baby, a cat, a dog, a lamb, or goatling. It's important for Omaia that it turns itself into an innocent creature to easier bewitch its victim. If Omaia calls a man by his name, it is crucial not to respond to the call and say nothing, and to light up a cigarette or say the prayer so he can protect himself of being bewitched. To the story. It was November. My great-grandfather and his neighbor were talking about winter approaching, how they have to go to the watermill and prepare flour, but they didn't want to procrastinate, so they'd have to go through the snow and cold temperatures. They agreed to meet at the watermill at 3 p.m. Meanwhile, however, before 3 p.m. came, the neighbor came down with a fever, so he went to bed and fell asleep. But he forgot to send someone to tell my great-grandfather that he was unable to go to the watermill. My great-grandfather waited for his neighbor, but he didn't show. It was already 4:30, so my great-grandfather decided to call out for his neighbor and to see what was going on. Since there was no phones back then, the only type of communication was, well, by yelling and shouting. So my great-grandfather shouted his neighbor's name, asking what's going on. The neighbor responded, "Don't worry, you go by yourself. I'll catch up. I need to harness my oxen to the ox cart." My great-grandfather reached the mill, finished his job, and started heading home. He was thinking, all right, it's 6:30 in the evening, not the dead of night. While he was returning, he saw a goatling next to the road. Since he was passing by some houses, he thought that the goatling probably escaped from some backyard. This is what he thought. He casually cast a glance to his right side and saw the goatling. Then he took to his left side. Same thing. He then looked straight ahead. The very same goatling. It was very strange to him, but he just continued his ride back home. Arriving at some crossroad, he once again peeked, just in case, to see what had happened to the goatling, and he saw it once again, but this time inside the ox cart. The goatling stared at him. Dead silence. And the worst part was the oxen, which were young, strong, and with big muscles, froze where they stood, hooves dug in the ground, like they were carrying 100 tons. They couldn't move at all, not a single centimeter. My great-grandfather realized what is going on and what kind of being this goatling is. So he slowly drew a cigarette from his pocket, lit it up, and crossed himself. Suddenly, the goatling vanished, just like that. And once again, the oxen continued pulling the ox cart and treading without any problem. When my great-grandfather arrived back at his house, he told his family about the encounter, and the next day visited his neighbor's home. The neighbor said he had caught a fever and hadn't spoken to a single soul, and it was impossible for him to have responded to my great-grandfather's shouting. Both of them realized it must have been Omaya, the evil spirit, which answered my great-grandfather and had targeted him. Number 6. Czechia. The following situation continues to occur around the dorm buildings of Charles University in the old quarters of Prague City named Karlova Kolej or Carolinum. Come dusk, a male voice calls out to drunken pedestrians who happen to be stumbling about the streets and begs for money from the shadows to purchase its freedom, then reveals itself to be a staggeringly tall skeleton. He is not interested in the sober, only those who are intoxicated. The skeletal apparition is known as Vincenz. In the olden days, Karlova Kolej was used as a medical faculty, where a very tall, very elegant young man by the same name worked. One old anatomy professor was enthralled with the young man's body and told him that he would make a wonderful addition to his collection of skeletons. The young man, who was poor, suggested that the professor purchase his skeleton, and the doctor agreed wholeheartedly, even paid him a pretty penny. Unfortunately, young Vincenz used his gold to gamble and drink and ended up in a tavern fight with other drunken fellows who killed him. Nowadays, the skeleton walks the streets in the environs of the Carolinum, begging for money from drunken passers-by so he can purchase his freedom from the professor. He haunts the area just after dusk. Number 7. Bulgaria. For a finish. The next memory has been taken from an academic anthology called ЗМЕИЦА, ЛАМЯ И ХАЛА, a book of witness accounts for the Slavic creature ЗМЕЙ, or dragon. These have been gathered from across Bulgaria by the scholar Professor Vihra Baeva, and contain several generations' worth of encounters and superstition. The storyteller is a 79-year-old woman from the village of Levka, southern Bulgaria. The account was collected in 1982. The ЗМЕЙ is a mighty dragon-like shapeshifter in the folklore of the Slavs. He's the master of clouds and storms, the guardian of villages and single households, and among other things a notorious lover. He'd take the form of a handsome man and steal away his chosen maiden from the village celebrations. To the story. Our relative was named Grandma Yoga. When the family lay down for the night, she'd cast a glance at her granddaughter Maria from time to time, but the lass began to vanish. She wasn't a girl anymore, but a young woman. Grandma Yoga told Maria's father, "Maria's already begun sneaking out at night. She slips away to somewhere." "Where to?" So-and-so, Nana Yoga told him, and he began guarding the maiden. The family was suspicious she'd been going out to some young lad, and this was true. They started following her. Once Grandma Yoga and her daughter found Maria outside in the yard, on the wide lawn, where they had a well. There was a well, but no water in it. The barren well, we called it. Maria had leaned over and was speaking into it. She was whispering sweet nothings. They caught her once, and a second time, and observed what she'd do. They'd hear her speak. When they began asking her about it, she said, "I'm speaking with such and such a sweetheart of mine. Her lover was some lad." "Then where is he?" they asked. He's at the bottom of the well, calling, speaking, and I answer. Yet there was not a single soul down there. It must have been a ЗМЕЙ dragon. Did she marry afterwards? The interviewer asks. Afterwards? She did marry. She managed to. The interviewer asks this question, since according to folk belief, a woman who was ЗМЕИЦА, or bewitched by the ЗМЕЙ dragon, would shy away from her own friends and from all men in the village that could be her sweetheart. Such a woman would often not marry and die or have the ЗМЕЙ's children. They've been said to be born with wings or different body mutations that resemble a dragon, a snake, or a lizard. But you'll hear more about this in the next video. A special thanks to Nemanja Vukadinovic for sharing his great-grandfather's story about an Amaya encounter with us. It was luckily written down and passed down from generation to generation in his family. And to Nikola Zekic as well for his grandma's recollection of a karakondrula from Montenegro. Cheers, guys! Also, the very first story you heard is my own childhood memory from my grandparents' house in Bulgaria. If you feel like more Slavic stories from around the Slavic world, get subbed. There's more on the way.